I'm going to introduce our panelists. First up, Gale Anne Hurd, the producer of everything from Terminator to Aliens to The Walking Dead and Falling Water. Up next, Geoff Johns, the DC Entertainment President and Chief Creative Officer and man behind this fall's Doomsday Clock. Cliff Bleszinski, the co-founder of Boss Key Productions, LawBreakers game director, and the man we have to thank for Gears of War. And last but certainly not least, Carlton Cuse, showrunner of my dearly departed Bates Motel, Colony, The Strain, and about 1 trillion other projects at this point. Carlton, I've told you this multiple times, but I think that you have clones. That's the only way you are able to do so much stuff. You and J.J. Abrams, some of the busiest guys around. Now I want to kick this off. I really think that this idea of geek culture becoming pop culture and finding out about the trends and changes in the industry from the people who changed it is really exciting and a great opportunity for us all here. So I want to kick it off, and we can go down the line if you guys want. What do you think is the biggest trend to affect your industry in the past decade, and how has it changed things?
Well, in television, what was a game changer for the kind of scripted content that I like, that it turns out I think I'm not alone in liking, was streaming, was the ability to have serialized content that wasn't a procedural, wasn't, wrapped up in one episode. But that was only possible when you could catch up on shows that you missed. And I know certainly that, shows like Lost were game changers for all of us who followed. So I would say that the ability to stream, whether it's like AMC, if you missed, Sunday night's episode, you can stream the episode on AMC before it's even available on any other streaming service. But people no longer feel left behind, and I'm very grateful for that change.
Gale, can I ask you a quick question? Are you on, for when it comes to television, are you on like team binge everything or like piece it out week by week?
I have to binge the various cuts of my shows.
Of course.
That's what I binge. But I do. I wouldn't say that I binge, but the shows that I watch, and they generally are my friends' shows. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what came first, that they were my friends and I started watching them, or I started watching them and then made sure that I met them. A little bit of both. But yeah, I never have enough time to binge watch like 13 episodes of Game of Thrones.
Yeah, there's just too much awesome entertainment these days.
You're binging your dailies.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Geoff?
Do I binge watch things?
Yeah.
I watch Game of Thrones live. I have to watch Game of Thrones live.
You'll be spoiled if not.
Yes, that is actually a problem now because of social media. If you delay to binge watch, you kind of already know a lot of the stuff that's happening if it's a show people watch. Anyway, the biggest change in my opinion, it's funny when everyone's like, who's a geek? And a lot of people raise their hand, but not everybody did. So somehow you guys got turned into geeks who didn't raise your hand. So welcome to the society. But I think for me, the people I work with in TV and film and comics is that we all came to Comic-Con when it was much smaller, when we were young. And now we're all in positions to go, hey, wouldn't it be cool if? And the technology, thankfully, and the appetite has caught up with us. So that's the biggest change, is I think just the generational change. Like, people go, well, superhero films won't last forever. And then the top 3 movies this summer so far happen to be Guardians, Spider-Man, and Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman.
Yeah, and
round of applause for Wonder Woman, guys.
So I don't know. I think that's generational, but technology has really helped us make the fact that Gorilla Grodd can be on a TV show every week is kind of insane.
Yeah.
But we couldn't do that without people who loved doing it and wanted to do it, and the technology to make it
From my end, I would have to say social media, of course, because watching these shows, I asked the question, Gale, because it feels like The Walking Dead is trending every week on Twitter, like whatever happens. Same thing with Game of Thrones and whatnot. And watching a show and live tweeting it and feeling like you're part of a bigger audience and something that's larger. The other thing for me also is the advent, especially for games, of Twitch streaming and Mixer and YouTubers. And we're at a point now promoting a new game where we need to reach out to these young, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed kids who stream for 8 to 10 hours a day and play the game and they yammer about it, to get them to play it and not rely on the old kind of press and whatnot to kind of get the word out. So for me, those are the biggest things, social media and Twitch and YouTube. Digital, always.
And last but not least, Mr. Cuse.
I mean, it's really sucks to go last after these three people because they've all said sort of the right answers. So I guess I would just say, I would add that for me, the inversion of movies and television, I had the head of a movie studio say to me the other day, I can't get any good writers. They're all working in television. Yep. And, honestly, the best dramatic writing is being done in television. And weirdly, there's this kind of convergence that's happening with companies like Amazon and Netflix now making movies. So you have this spectrum of the sort of streaming spectrum, which is kind of more reliant on budgets than really a differentiation in medium. It's just you have like high budget projects with stars. When Emma Stone, who wins an Academy Award, goes and her next thing is going to be a television show for Netflix with Cary Fukunaga and called Maniac for Netflix. I mean, that's the differentiation between movies and television is basically vanishing, and part of that I think is due. Basically, as Geoff's talking about technology, we can do things in television that you couldn't do before, so we can actually do visual effects and create worlds and do things that were not possible. And so the convergence of movies and television, I guess, would be my answer.
Yeah,
you could go last. That was great.
I think it's really interesting because I think if I look back to the one show that kicked off the binging model, it was Lost. Like, Lost was a show that, like Game of Thrones now, you had to be there every single week because there was some huge reveal, there was some new mystery, and it led into everyone wanting to have a conversation on places like social media about what does it all mean.
It was also that HBO mold, though. Also, The Sopranos kind of broke the mold in regards to that, where you have a long, deep scripted show. I mean, they were doing that with Oz back in the day, and then getting to the point where it's these shows where the opening credits are almost like a palate cleanser to like get you in or like whet your appetite, where you actually don't want to fast forward it, even if you're like you had it recorded.
Well, that was the great thing on HBO, is that they would repeat episodes, and regular television, broadcast television, really didn't do that unless you got into syndication.
Yeah, so in 2004, when we started Lost, like there were only basically closed-ended shows. There was no science fiction on television. It was you couldn't tell a complex serialized narrative. That was just a no-no. It just was. But we happened to come along at the same time as this new technology started to evolve surrounding the internet, both social media, which created awareness around the show, but also the sort of ability now to watch the show on DVD and catch up, and it completely radically changed the type of television that got made.
Well, I'm curious, with the rise of streaming, and I'm sorry, Cliff, that you aren't able to speak to this as much as Geoff and Gale and Carlton, but does that change how you conceptualize your shows, from the DC CW shows to The Walking Dead to Carlton? I think you backed yourself into a corner now because people are going to be binging shows like Bates and Colony and The Strain. So does that change how you're conceptualizing what those projects will be, knowing that people might come to them late, not on TV, and watch them all at once?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I think about the show's legacy. And so part of the reason, a significant part of the reason that I chose voluntarily to end Bates Motel and Colony was thinking about the show in its totality and believing that like a book on a library shelf, those shows will have a life, and that they needed to be complete stories, and they needed to sort of end on my timeline, not on the sort of timeline based on studio economics. So I think each show could have gone on longer, but it was really my advocacy that like, hey, we should end these things now while they're still good and while we can feel like we're telling the story that we want to tell. We're not stretching it out.
It's like when Vince Gilligan was like, oh, I'm going to end this story, you know, of turning Mr. Chips into Scarface. And he's like, okay, this is Breaking Bad. This is how it ends, and that's it. Because some shows just limp along, like you said, right?
Yeah.
How about for you, Gale and Geoff? I mean, The Walking Dead is sort of the opposite of that, where you guys intentionally are able to continue on indefinitely.
Well,
That's the structure of this
Robert
work.
Kirkman, who continues to write a fantastic comic book. So, you know, we have a roadmap going into the future. You know, so we're very lucky there. But I think it's absolutely right. You never want to end a show after it's, you know, expired by date. It's like leaving a carton of milk in the refrigerator too long. Because the fans won't remember it as that fond thing that they fell in love with it. They'll remember it as, oh, that used to be good. So.
I think when I look at the comics medium, I think that probably the rise of being able to read comics digitally has changed your industry a lot over the past decade. Geoff, have you seen a difference in the way that comics are consumed significantly, and is that something that's changed how you guys make comics? You can sort of binge read comics as well in that way because you have them all on your iPad or at the touch of your hand.
Yeah, I can only speak to what I know because I don't run publishing at DC, but Jim Lee was one of the publishers, along with Dan DiDio, was very adamant about getting our day-and-date digital comics out in 2011. And there were a lot of stores that were frightened by that because suddenly someone could just download a comic on their iPad rather than go to the store that Wednesday and pick up a comic book. And it turns out it didn't hurt the print part of the business at all. And in fact, it actually helped international because international was where we were having the most growth as far as digital downloads, because there's, you know, I've been to Europe and I've looked for comic shops and it's hard to find, you know, American comics, and if you like Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman, it's, you know, you only have a limited options internationally. Brazil, same thing, like everywhere outside the US and Canada and the UK, it's hard to find those comics. So there was growth certainly with digital. It's, you know, it's kind of tapered off a certain way. I think there's a lot of people that consume these characters and stories through TV, film, games, and then some people go to the comics.
I still prefer physical.
Yeah, I prefer physical too, but I also have 2 storage units full of comics now, and
which I'm sure many people here can relate to.
Yeah.
When I think of sort of like the forward-facing changes in technology beyond what we've talked about already, I think 3D and VR have really changed a lot of these various industries, and I'm curious how that affects, those two in particular, affect your creative processes, if at all.
I can talk about VR really quick because I think VR we're a little bit. I think it's 3D has a massive impact, but I don't think VR has yet to really figure out how to monetize it, and that's what everyone's trying to figure out, how to monetize it. Cliff and I were talking about the Arkham VR. I don't know if anyone's played Arkham VR.
Play it, it's awesome.
It's awesome. It's one of the best VR experiences I've seen and experienced in. And if that kind of stuff can start to get more, you know, audience penetration and the technology get more hands, then I think you'll see VR really grow into something potentially really huge. It will be huge.
One of the problems right now, and I had a VR pitch, and you know, the game I'm doing right now is a shooter, PC and PlayStation 4, but I love VR. I've been very, very vocal about my love of all different types of it when it's quality, is that the platform holders aren't really allocating budgets properly for it. The Batman game was fantastic because somebody coughed up a little bit of dough. There's a reason why a lot of VR experiences feel, you know, you get what you pay for sometimes, and a lot of VR experiences are just kind of like cool little demos that you go through for like 30 seconds, and you're like, oh, that was a cute novelty. I guess I'm just going to go back to my real game. But until the platform holders really start funding it, it's just not going to happen.
I agree with that, and right now we're doing some VR with our films. Justice League, upcoming Justice League, we're doing a VR experience, but it really starts to go under the marketing cost.
Right.
You know, it's not in a production,
something
creative
you can
cost.
experience in a theater or
Yeah,
something,
we have a
or
TV,
at Comic-Con.
yeah, we have a TV department, we have a games department, we have a film department. There's no VR department yet. It falls into marketing and then working with the studio that creates it. So VR hasn't quite changed. I don't think VR has yet changed our business. I think it will. 3D is just, and 3D's kind of tapered off too.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I remember being like in 2009 at Comic-Con witnessing James Cameron's Avatar for the first time and everyone getting 3D glasses and it just like blowing our minds. And I think, it had a huge hit, and now it's sort of tapered off to, yes, people have 3D TVs, but we don't have 3D TV shows.
3D TV is kind of dead, really.
Yeah. And sort of the same, like we don't see as many movies that are full 3D because it maybe ended up being a little gimmicky, and finding a way to have it be immersive as well, which I think in a lot of the superhero movies you guys do really well. But I'm curious what you guys think about if 3D is going away, or if you think there's like a resurgence of that in the future.
When I watched Avatar in 3D IMAX, we're all friends here, right? No one's gonna out me.
Except for that camera.
Oh, oops. It made me sick. I mean, I can't have VR goggles on or glasses on for more than 4 seconds, or I want to throw up. So I clearly have that inner ear issue, which makes it really hard for me. And I know certainly just from people I've spoken with, it's a price point. It's a price point issue with a lot of viewers, which is there are going to be certain films like an Avatar, something that really was conceived from the very beginning to be experienced a certain way. And by the way, I went back and saw Avatar not in IMAX, and I was fine in 3D. And people are going to pay that because they want that experience. And filmmakers like Jim and filmmakers like Chris Nolan, and there are a lot of filmmakers who really can conceive of a completely enveloping world that you want to enter the way that they perceived it. And you'll pay for that experience.
And but it's curated because Nolan and Cameron cared, and they didn't just slap it in post.
Exactly.
And that makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
and so many of the Me Too people in VR and all this, just slapping it in there just because they think they need that as a bullet point to market it to China.
Yeah,
that's half the
when
problem.
you see Wedding Crashers 2 in 3D, you're kind of like, was this converted or did they shoot it with a 3D camera?
Right.
There's so much of it now too. And it's hard to distinguish. And when you see enough bad movies in 3D too, you're like, you know what? I'm not gonna go pay $18 or $25 or whatever it is for a 3D ticket. I'm like you. Like 3D's cool, but it's not my thing. I'd rather see the film as a film, And I have a 3D TV, and I put on those glasses twice. And the first time I was like, this is awesome. And the second time I was like, hey, you got to see this. Isn't this awesome?
Yeah.
And that was it.
I've watched soccer. I think they've broadcast a couple
3D.
of soccer
That's cool.
matches in 3D, and that was cool.
But then the camera should be on the field, and like the ball comes at you. Like it should be like a cool experience. And sometimes 3D just for 3D's sake, And a lot of times now when you see our production schedules on films, you see, oh, here's a 3D conversion. It's people still like to go see it. So as long as they like to go see it, it'll be there. But like radio, when TV came out, everyone said radio was dead. It's never going to go away. It's an art form, just like comic books won't go away. It's an art form. So 3D will be there in some way. But
I'm curious, Gale and Carlton, when 3D was at its height, was there ever a push for 3D television? No.
I mean, not in my shows.
Yeah. Or like in general, did you hear that around the industry?
No, I mean zero. It's
It
never.
would be very
I
expensive.
It's never come up. Honestly,
I'd like to see Lost in 3D.
Can we remaster that for the 20th anniversary? I also do want to ask briefly about Twitch. You brought it up, Cliff. It has completely changed the video game industry. We deal with that a lot at IGN. It's really interesting. I'm sure a lot of people here stream video games. And I'm curious, from outside perspectives, Gale and Geoff and Carlton, what are your thoughts on Twitch? And do you see that sort of streaming culture come to these other mediums?
Oh, well, I mean, when I was a kid, we had Super Nintendo, and if I could have shown my friend I'm playing Super Mario Brothers and I was going to win it, I would have done that.
But I'm curious, is there going to be a situation where it's like group watching, where, because there's you've seen YouTube videos of so-and-so reacts to this trailer, right? And that's like free marketing for everybody's work. So
it's funny too.
We'll get to the point where the Star Wars trailers, you see people crying and everything. It's amazing. But I wonder if we'll get to the point where there's just like the group watching of, watching someone's real-time reaction to the Red Wedding and something like that, right? Like it could be very interesting. But right now, the other thing besides games is like social eating, where it's like people in Korea just eating lots of food and people talking about it. It's weird, man.
The thing is, though, like on the experiences, I don't think anyone will ever really watch someone's reaction to Red Wedding as like consistently. I think it'll be a fun thing to do after you've seen the
After
episode.
the fact, yeah.
But nobody sits around watching TV looking at the other person watching TV with them.
Yeah.
It's just not an activity.
You know, I mean, it's like when people first started doing behind the scenes EPKs. It expanded the experience. I love, as much as I love watching movies, I love the commentary that you get from the cast and the director and the writers and, you know, the production designer. When you realize your favorite scene was an accident, that, you know, there was this huge problem and someone had to be creative in that moment and solve it, that to me was just a gem that, and I think there's still more opportunity for that kind of thing, for us all to learn more and also to humanize the people that we love so much, whether they're the actors or the writers and directors and producers.
I want to shift things over from sort of the changes in technology to the changes in the stories that we're telling. I think, you know, you were talking a little bit about how it's generational, Geoff, sort of this shift towards more geek culture, and I think a lot of it is the nostalgia we have and the things we love as kids. We want to see them continue on. So I'm curious if you can all talk about, you know, the challenges or not of launching a new IP, and if you think that the interest and heavy leaning into adaptation is a trend that will go away.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that, you know, in an environment where there are 450 television shows and you are trying to get attention, the people that are spending a lot of money to make television want IP. You know, I've just spent the last 6 months doing Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, which will come out on Amazon next year, and I basically we took the character of Jack Ryan, modified him quite extensively. He's going to be played by John Krasinski, and then James Greer is being played by Wendell Pierce, who also is somewhat different than in the books. And then everything else is original. I mean, we came up with a whole new story, a whole new cast of characters, but you know, it's fundamentally an original spy story. But the reason that we got a lot of money to make it and got a chance to make it was because it was under the, you know, the Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan moniker, and that has enormous value for Amazon, and you know, that was what allowed us to do it. So it's just hard. I think it's just harder to get people to take the big risks on original IP.
I also think that like IP in film is kind of the new movie star. You know, there's a very few movie stars now that drive box office.
Yes.
And the characters that we love and know. There are so many movies and so many 450 TV shows. It's crazy. Congrats for breaking through, by the way. You do need to capture people right away, and you know, Wonder Woman's an example of a character that everybody knows, but maybe doesn't know her story, and so you have a huge advantage for people to be much more interested in seeing that because they know who that character is, and they might like the idea of the character, but not know what her story is, and that's why they go to see the movie.
I'm curious what your strategy is in DC Comics, because I mean, comics by nature are a bit more iterative. You're always going to have a Superman story and a Batman story unless you kill them, and then hopefully you bring them back later. But I'm curious, like, what your strategy is with launching new characters or new stories within the pre-existing one instead of relying on.
Well, you know, one thing I always tell anyone who says, "Hey, maybe you know, comics are dead." I'm like, if you guys don't understand comics, our characters will fossilize. Like Dick Tracy and the Shadow, they will disappear from pop culture, and they won't because they'll be stuck in a certain time period. Like Bane from Dark Knight Rises was created in the 90s in a really cool story called Nightfall, which is available in trade paperback. And sorry, I had to do that for my publishers. And I tell people that all the time. If they stopped publishing Batman comics in 1993, we would not have Bane. And he was really cool in Dark Knight Rises, and there's a lot of great stuff in all our TV shows and our films, and even in Wonder Woman, the movie, that was influenced and ideas that came from comic books that are relatively inexpensive to a big studio to publish, that come from all the great creators, and they all go into the melting pot, and they keep the characters fresh through those characters, and you know, you introduce new characters every week. Every week there's a new character from DC. Mm-hmm. Now it gets harder and harder because when there's no superheroes in the universe or characters in the universe, you could that guy flies and he's got all these powers, he's inspirational, and then we're gonna have a guy that's just human and he's he's a vigilante and he's dark, and then Wonder Woman, and then you start to fill in all these niches, and soon you have to create a character. You're like, oh, I want to create a vigilante who's like self-made. You're like, well, try and improve upon Batman. I dare you guys to try and improve upon Batman. It's hard.
Well, Punisher's pretty damn good.
Punisher's cool, but he's different. He kills people.
Yeah.
And he's revenge-driven, and he lost his family to mobsters, and he's going to go kill a bunch of mobsters. And I'm like, that's a great character, right? That's a really interesting character, and you understand his psychology and his pathos, and you kind of get a thrill out of seeing mobsters that you hate get shot in the head, as sick as that is, or bad guys on Walking Dead get eaten by zombies. But you kill everybody, by the way. But yeah, it's there's new characters all the time, and Punisher was actually introduced through Spider-Man in a bizarre and he was a side character, and then he broke out, and we do that all the time. It's getting harder and harder and harder to find those new characters. And also, you're like, you don't introduce a new character and go, let's make a movie about that character now before there's a Wonder Woman movie. It just doesn't, there's not a fan base yet, so it takes a while for these things.
What I love is the fact that now we're seeing a kaleidoscopic world represented not only, and it's been that way in comic books, and certainly, I mean, if you go back in horror, and thank you, George Romero, may you rest in peace, if you look at Night of the Living Dead, where the protagonist is an African American, the genre, whether it's comic books, video games, horror, science fiction, wasn't given its due. I'm about to make something out of Lord of Light, Rogers is the Last and he's Lord of Light, and there was a transgender character in that long before, transgender, was on Transparent on television. So I just love the fact that we all celebrate the legacy of people who were trailblazers. And the rest of the world is now catching up.
Yeah. Now, Cliff, I want to talk to you. I mean, you've sort of made a career about launching game-changing new IPs from Gears and now up through LawBreakers.
I love new IP, and as much as I do love, Batman and everything that's out there, and I will just always line up for the next one.
Remember, he's sitting right next to you.
Just creatively, though, myself, I think Jim Lee did a podcast a couple years ago with, he's suggesting that I did a Lobo game at one point, and I was very flattered. But it was I'm actually in the seat where Hideo Kojima was supposed to be, so he had some production issues, and he asked me at some point to help him work on the new Silent Hill with him. And I was like, oh my God, I'm flattered, and I'd probably totally screw it up. So for me, it's always been about new worlds, and there's nothing for me more flattering than creating something that people then either cosplay as or get tattoos of. And it became like a thing for the Gears franchise for people to get tattoos. And for the new IP LawBreakers, there's actually been a couple people that have done it already. And it's like, if you're willing to scar your body for this, you clearly care about it. So that's always what.
Or they lost a bet.
Yeah, fair enough. Or a poker game.
I'm curious, though, if you're seeing a trend in the video game industry to go back to franchises that people love and maybe thought were dead. And I'm thinking
there is. I mean, the South Park member berries. Remember Beyond Good and Evil. Remember that, right? And it's like people love nostalgia, the Final Fantasy remakes, things like that. And whatever gets you through the day. It's just we're going to be seeing Mario and Zelda games until the end of time.
Gale and Carlton, you both, Falling Water and Colony respectively, are new stories. Is that something you found is harder to break out versus something like The Strain or The Walking Dead?
I mean, I don't know. It's just I try not to over game it. I mean, I really just try to find ideas and really, if something kind of gets stuck in my brain, then I try to do whatever I can to get it made. So that idea, the idea for Colony was just something that Ryan Condal and I had made a pilot actually from this comic book called The Sixth Gun together, and that did not get ordered to series, but we were just hanging out and talking about other stuff, and we started concocted this idea of we were talking about how in Paris in World War II was really interesting. You see I'd seen these pictures of these women in fur coats sitting in sidewalk cafes drinking espresso while Nazi stormtroopers were going by, and this idea of sort of willfully ignoring this kind of massive upheaval in the political order, and we started talking about, was there a science fiction parable to that, was there a way to tell that in a modern context? And so we came up with this idea of doing an alien invasion show where you didn't really see the aliens, you just dealt with the consequences of the proxy government they put in place and what they started doing to the other people. And and how almost every country in the world had been a colony or colonizer. And so just kind of like followed the idea, and then, but it was really difficult. We kind of became, I really didn't think we could sell it if we went out to sell it, so we spec'd it, and then we sold it on the script, because it just felt like, well, it was hard to explain how it was an alien invasion show and it wouldn't seem derivative of other ones, and so we sort of proved it on the page, and that was how we got it made. And I mean, it's been a cool experience, whereas the Strain was kind of the different experience. Guillermo del Toro tried to pitch that as a television show, and no one would buy it. In fact, one network said, could you make it a comedy? And his deep offense at that comment led him to go write a trilogy of books. And again, it was his belief that if you put the story on the page, it would eventually get told. And so he got together with a novelist named Chuck Hogan, who had written the book that was the basis of the movie The Town, and they wrote this trilogy of books. And then Guillermo made a comic book. And then we took it out, and based on the existing IP, then we were able to we had like 4 people that wanted to buy it. So it just, I don't know,
it's easier to have that IP already there and proven instead of having to test it on something.
Yeah, exactly.
Film. I also do want to talk about the concept of cinematic universes. Now, in theory, we hear cinematic universe tossed around, specifically around movies, but I think we've really, it sort of was an idea that originated in comics, that you could have this whole DC imprint and Marvel imprint that are all connected. And I think with TV as well, like Walking Dead and Fear the Walking Dead are a prime example, and you have video games that exist in that realm as well. And I'm curious for you guys, how has the desire for connectiveness and a larger universe for a property changed the way you've done your jobs, or are doing your jobs?
Well, I think one of the reasons that Fear came to be was we have split seasons of The Walking Dead, and there is the idea, well, we could have zombies actually almost all the time, but you can't. Carlton can attest to this. Making 16 episodes of a TV series is hard enough, and our showrunner is still working 12 months a year, whether it's in, with the starting up the writer's room and, going through post. You can't, it's not like you can't do 32, much less anymore. So it was the idea that there was still a lot of stories to tell in that universe without any crossover characters and without doing a spin-off. While still having the fans who are aware of The Walking Dead, whether it be as a comic book or the TV series or the video games, who are interested in getting to know new families. So that was really the inspiration for proceeding with a show set in the universe without being a spin-off. And I think that is actually the most remarkable thing, that it wasn't a spin-off of a particular character.
Yeah, but people really do. Once they get into a world and get invested in it, even in non-genre version. Like Dick Wolf has all those Chicago shows, and they like cross characters back and forth between them, and
Law and Order universe.
My pitch is to do Chicago, which is very meta, like the road company of Chicago in Chicago.
I bet
with
CBS
all the same
would listen
characters.
to your pitch. I bet they would listen to your pitch.
The danger with universes, you say cinematic universes, all this stuff, is that movies become about other movies. And again, you look at Wonder Woman, and although it's connected to a larger universe, it's really its own film that was done on purpose, because we had seen a lot of movies part of cinematic universes that end up becoming about setting up other movies and being other movies, and it's not a satisfying experience. And we want to just make great movies. Like at DC, we're not trying to, they all live in the same universe, but they don't exist because we're going to connect them all super tightly. They have to be their own thing, and Aquaman has to be a great Aquaman movie that is also part of the bigger universe.
I'm curious about how things have changed a bit, because in previous, maybe a decade ago, you probably would have you had a Batman movie, but then you were trying to make a Green Lantern movie, and that was separate from that. And now you're making them all exist under this same umbrella. So do you feel that need, beyond what you just said, like like, what is the push to have them still exist under that umbrella instead of being completely separate stories, even if they don't necessarily always intersect?
Well, Justice League brings all those characters together, and then they go separate ways, and Wonder Woman is a very different movie than an Aquaman movie. And the characters have very different tones, just like their comic books have different tones. So it's no different than what we're doing in comic books. You don't read an Aquaman comic book and go, oh, I got to read a Batman comic to understand this Aquaman comic book. That's a bad comic book. You know, and Justice League is the one that brings them all together because that's just what that is. But as far as building movies, a Batman movie and an Aquaman movie and a Wonder Woman 2 and a, you know, whatever other films we're doing, no matter what they are, they have to be great on their own merits, and they happen to also be in the same universe, and occasionally those characters do come together.
It's interesting. I've heard it discussed as like a big screen TV show in some ways, that people don't want these stories to end. They want to just keep existing in those worlds. Do you feel like that's
I agree with Carlton. Is I think that it's not for us. It's not a never-ending cinematic. You gotta say, okay, we want to tell all these great stories, but eventually somebody else will come along and do another version of Batman, and somebody else will come along and do another version, just like you know. So you need to look at the now, and okay, this is this Wonder Woman for now. 25 years from now, they'll probably do another Wonder Woman movie, but and I'll watch it. But I like, you know, for us, we're not sitting there going, how can we do 8 Wonder Woman movies? We want to do a really good run and make it high quality and make it great, as long as Gal Gadot's playing Wonder Woman.
Yeah. Now, Cliff, I haven't necessarily seen this trend impact games as much, but do you think that there's a push towards, you know, connecting different franchises?
It's
together?
honestly a miracle that a video game ever even ships and or makes money. Well, so the most you can hope for is, you know, what everybody moves towards is like the games as service, and you can start weaving things in there. We had a little bit of that in the Gears of War franchise, where, you know, what's the story of this character, and then everybody trying to do all the transmedia with games, which majority of it usually face plants. So for our end, it's really one of those things that we need to get a handle on how to ship games better and build a bigger audience before we can even consider this thing. All their mediums have a little bit of a head start on video games, because video games have only been around for, like, you know, 40 or so years, so they've had a little bit more time to suss it out.
I also, before we sort of look forward a bit, I do want to ask how fandom has changed things, and I think that social media is one way, the fact that people immediately want to go online, talk about TV episodes, talk about twists in comics. But I'm curious if that has changed any of your storytelling or development processes at all, knowing that people do want to go and talk about it and, you know, spoil things maybe before they even happen because they're so excited about what this property will be.
I mean, I think that we live in a world now where people don't want to just watch; they want to participate, and I think social media gives people the opportunity to do that. And whether it's, you know, in a simpler form like talking back, or whether it's creating fan fiction, or, you know, we experimented a lot with that on Lost, where we started the Dharma Initiative, and people kind of came together and joined the Dharma Initiative and organized and took tests to become Dharma chemists or Dharma physicists, and I mean, it was really incredible how people wanted to sort of participate in the world. And so I think that social media presents opportunities for people to not just passively participate, I mean, not passively watch, but to also participate. I think that's something that will kind of continue to grow and develop, and kind of there'll be new ways in which that'll emerge.
I've always found there's like this strata where there's like, you'll have your average person that goes and sees, and the example I use is when I saw the first X-Men film, or the second one, I can't recall which one it was, and I was never that big on those comics, and I remember coming out and one of my friends was like, oh, they're probably going to do the Phoenix Saga, and I'm like, what the hell's the Phoenix Saga? And you want that, like, and it sounds terrible, but you want like actually guy to like show up and be like, well, if you had actually read the books, or if you actually knew the history, then I'm like, I want to know, and then you start digging in even deeper and knowing the actual details of characters and subplots and who that random villain was at the end of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, social media and the internet obviously have changed everything, but not just like, I wish I had that when I did my homework, you know, back in the day, because it would have been so easy. But I feel like it's just everyone can have everything and all the information they want at once. Spoilers, I don't know about, I mean, I think everybody up in here has been around long enough to remember when that wasn't such a prevalent thing. And then I kind of had a mourning period where I was like, oh, things are going to get spoiled now. For like, it's always going to be spoiled, and people are going to speculate, and everything's out there, and everyone's talking about it. But the real, like, realistically, those who want to be spoiled, let them be spoiled, and those who don't won't go and search out. They won't click on every article that says, hey, here's the plot for the new Batman movie, or here's the plot for the upcoming. Did you hear what happened in the upcoming episode of Walking Dead? This happened. You know, Reddit. I can't tell you how many times that there'll be somebody on Reddit that goes, "Hey, I just found out DC's film slate," and they list it in great detail, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, look at this!" And it's an article everywhere, and I read it, and I'm like, "Where the hell did they get that?" That's not what we're doing.
Was it right?
No, it's completely wrong.
But they can just do that work for you then.
Yeah,
and
but I
that's
mean,
one
I
thing
could
off
go on Reddit and write a big thing about Marvel's slate, and like it would travel, and sign it, and it would travel, and you know. But it feels like everyone's really hungry for, as Carlton says, they want more, they want to participate, they want to have their voice heard, they want to be part of it, and I think we have to embrace that, and that's just part of the nature.
Well, I actually, before Gale, I want to hear your answer as well, but I'm curious for you, Geoff. Do you find that you guys lean into it? And I'm thinking specifically in Batman v Superman, like you have that sort of maybe dark side vision that Batman has, and it's like begging people, you know, puzzle this out, figure it out, try and like this will mean something, but what does it mean? Do you find that you guys put those sort of Easter egg moments in movies or TV shows or games to spark conversations?
I mean, they've been in there since I was a kid. When Empire Strikes Back came out,
Yeah.
and he said, "Luke, you know, I'm your father." You're like, "Well, I need to see the next one." Or when they hint at who's the Emperor, he's this weird guy in a hologram. Or Back to the Future, Doc Brown comes back at the end and says something's got to be done about your kids, and they go off. You're like, you know, we've done this forever. Every time there's more than one, there's a sequel, or you're building a story, you're always foreshadowing something. So that would include, you know, things today.
Yeah.
But you are more conscious of the idea that there are small things that people will catch, and then they'll tell everybody else about them. You know.
I want to hear your answer, though. I'm sorry, Gale.
I can't remember the question, but
about social media and the rise of...
What I find is that we're looking for our community, and that's one great thing about all of us are here at Comic-Con, because this is our community. And what you can now have is connectivity to your community. They don't have to live near you. You know, I hear from people all over the world who are fans of The Walking Dead, or in my case, fans of Arsenal soccer.
Your feed is amazing because
and you know, because that's why I'm Gunner Gale online. People assume it's because I love first-person shooter games, and maybe that's true too. But I love finding people with whom I have connectivity, regardless of where they live in the world. And that's one great thing that social media has done to unite all of us. And the wonderful thing about it is that it used to be, I mean, I remember I was in a taxi in London, and I was going there to do press the first season of The Walking Dead, and I was saying to the taxi driver, he's like, I told him about The Walking Dead, he said, "Oh, that sounds fantastic. How many months later is it going to air in England versus in the US?" I said, "It's going to air immediately." He said, "Oh, thank God," because I pirated Lost, and I felt guilty about it, but I couldn't wait. So it's one big community now, and we can get people in all corners of the world, The Walking Dead and all of our shows immediately, and I think that's another great thing that unites us and allows social media to work.
Yeah. So I just needed to digress about this for a second. So I get invited by the government of China to come talk in Shanghai about television, and my guide takes me to, this is right after season 4 of Lost, and he takes me, it's like it just ended, and he takes me to a video store, and there is a giant video display of like season 4 in like 4-color box thing, as the store was called Video World, and I could buy for $7 the entire season of the show, all dubbed in Chinese, and it had been like a week, and then we went across the street to this other video store, which was called Better Than Video World, and they had another box set, which I bought. So the kind of karmic retribution was then, like a month later, we have a meeting at Disney where we're going to talk about the official box set, and they were like, "Do you have any ideas?" And I'm like, "Actually, I do. Here's some." So, and then the other thing was, basically, when we did the finale of Lost, we was the first TV show that had gone day and date in like 50 countries, and it was basically saying, well, like, if they were all saying you can't dub the shows, and they were like, well, if like Chinese pirates can dub the show in 2 days, why can you not have paid dubbing services actually deliver the show And they couldn't really argue with that, and so we ended up doing the show day and date in like 50 countries.
That's incredible.
That's cool.
We only just have a couple minutes left, but I could listen to you guys all talk together for another hour. So I do want to give a big round of applause for all four of you for being here. In our last couple of minutes, though, I do want to ask you, we're talking about the changes that have happened. What do you think 5 years from now, where do you think your medium will be? What do you think it will look like? And what will have changed? Putting you on the spot.
Who, me?
Oh, anyone.
From my end, I just think video games are going to get more and more interconnected. You're going to have more and more people playing them professionally, more and more people being paid by fans just to watch them play it. And you're going to see more and more increased budgets, but also weirder and weirder stuff. So it's just, it's going to be an interesting time, and I hope VR actually sticks.
I think they're going to put another level onto this convention center for all the people.
I mean, I was out like in Canada and Morocco for many months working on this Jack Ryan thing, and I came back and I had a meeting at Netflix, and I walked into their new building, and it's huge and amazing, and one entire wall is just like a video screen that sort of changes scenes every day to match the backgrounds of various shows. And to watch that company have gone from spending $300 million on original programming 5 years ago to like over $5 billion now. I mean, I think that you're just seeing this, the rise of streaming will kind of swamp everything, and I think that will have a significant, the idea of kind of traditional television is really being deeply impacted by the rise of companies like Netflix and Amazon, and it'll be interesting if Apple gets into that as well.
Yeah, it feels like the digital companies are taking just riskier, awesome properties on, which is really exciting.
Gale, did you have a change as well?
What I love is that anyone here in this room has the opportunity to be the next great creator, because there are so many mediums available to all of you now that didn't exist certainly when I was starting out. So never, if that's what you want, don't doubt yourself. And if you're passionate about it, one of my favorite films of I think a year and a half ago was Tangerine. Which I think is now actually going to be a series, and they shot it on iPhones, and it went on to win multiple awards. You can have short content. You can be a YouTube star. There is no limit to what everyone in this world, in this room, and in Comic-Con and outside of Comic-Con can achieve. And that's what I'm really excited about, is there are no limits anymore.
Well, Gale, Geoff, Cliff, Carlton, thank you so much for chatting with us tonight. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. That'll do our panel. Have a great Comic-Con.